Good morning, and a special welcome to all of our speakers and panelists today, and all of our guests. My name is Mark Baldassare, the President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California, and PPIC is having its first ever conference on California's future today, and we kick off that conference this morning with a session on education, followed by a session on climate change, the economy, and ending with governance later on this afternoon. So we have a very exciting day of activities around very important issues for California's future ahead of us. I just want to make a couple of brief comments. I want to thank our sponsors, many of whom are here in the audience today, and their names are prominently displayed on your tables. The Public Policy Institute of California is an organization that began in 1994 with a generous gift from William Hewlett and tremendous foresight in terms of the need for an organization with a mission to inform and improve public policy. But even with the generous gift that Mr. Hewlett left for us and the Public Policy Institute of California, we would not be able to have an event like we have today without the generous resources that were provided to us from the Hewlett Foundation for the 2025 project, from the Irvine Foundation, which helps us with our ongoing work in Sacramento, with the Bechtel Foundation, which has generously contributed to this conference, and many other sponsors today, Cal Chamber and the SEIU, AARP, and First Five, the Sierra Health Foundation, Edison, Comcast, and our knowledge partner for this event, McKinsey, who has helped us think through many of the speakers and helped us reach out. We have a tremendous staff. Many of them are working hard outside to get people inside this morning who've been a part of this activity, as well as people who are here on our research staff, some of whom you'll hear from today, others who you'll get to meet because they're sitting at your tables, and a board of directors who is present here today that has been very supportive and very helpful in putting together this event. I also want to thank Capital Public Affairs, who has helped us organize this event, and Fenton, Communications, who is here today taking pictures or photos for us for a YouTube presentation, which we'll be doing a video. So I did it last night, and I recommend that you do it. It's kind of fun, and I think that you will, you'll enjoy seeing yourself on a PPIC YouTube. The theme of our conference is California's future. We think it's very important to remind people in these times that California has a future, and we have been active all year around the 2010 election, reminding all the candidates for statewide office that California has a future, and that it's very important, especially in times like today, to remember that and to make careful plans and make thoughtful actions. We met with every one of the candidates that was on the November ballot statewide, every major party candidate, all 18 of them, and we take no credit for who won or lost in terms of reading our information about California's future, because they all read it, but hopefully the ones who won will use some of that information, and you'll be hearing some of that today. And those who didn't win, well, they'll be running for other things in the future, or they'll be active in civic life like all you are, and hopefully they'll be that much better informed. We've been in this event today is really for us the culmination, the last chapter of our outreach around the 2010 election. We will start a new phase, which I'll tell you about later in the afternoon after this event. But we've been involved in a lot of other activities besides speaking to the statewide candidates. We hosted an event here with Governor Wilson and Speaker Brown to talk about the simple versus supermajority vote. We also hosted an event in this very same room with the Pew Center on the States, looking at the budget situation in California, as well as some of the other states that are experiencing very severe stress in their economy and budgets. We participated in a governor's summit and legislative testimony on higher education based on work that we did around the state's master plan. But this conversation that we're having today is one that we've been looking forward to and planning for all year, because it's timed to bring attention to the importance of issues around planning for the state's future, coinciding with the swearing in of the new legislature, which occurred yesterday, the gubernatorial transition, which is ongoing. We're about a month into it, and a month to go. And also there's a greater sense of urgency, obviously, today with the announcement of about a month ago that we face a very severe budget situation this year and next year, and the governor has called the legislature into a special session. The governor-elect is busy putting together his thoughts for what he will want to accomplish in the short term, at least with the budget. He plans to announce those tomorrow. We had reached out to his staff several times to try to see if he could be here today, but he needs another day of prep, I'm told. So we will be hearing from him separately tomorrow, and look forward to what he has to say. Obviously, education is the biggest part of the state's budget, the biggest single expenditure, K through 12. If you add higher education in, you have by far the predominance of the budget. In the public opinion polling we do, education is the number one budget concern that Californians have, the number one budget priority. So, and we know from our work at the Institute and what we've been telling others this year that it's tremendously important to the state's future and quality of life for the residents and the type of economy we're going to be able to have in California. So that's why we start today's discussion with education, and then move on to climate change and economy and governance. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, who's been my colleague for about 15 years now, Hans Johnson, who is our research director in the Thomas E. Sutton Chair in Policy Research. He's one of the top demographers in California. He leads he's been leading the research that we do in education at PPIC, and he's contributed significantly to it through the work that he's done on the college workforce skills gap. And Hans will make a few comments and then introduce Mayor Villaraigosa. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Mark was generous to introduce me as one of the top demographers in California. There are three of us, just as a way of full disclosure, but I'm in the top three. So I, too, would like to welcome you to PPIC's Forum on California's Future, and specifically our session on K-12 education. As Mark said, education is the preeminent source of expenditures for the state budget, so it's right and appropriate that we would start with this topic, but also, of course, it is very much about our future, and educating our children, and their success has a lot to say about how we are going to do as a state, both economically and more widely, civically and socially. And as Mark said, Fenton Communications is walking around and talking to people. Please give them a piece of your mind. And all of us who follow the Public Affairs channel on YouTube will be able to see you publicly in that forum as well. And we have a very exciting agenda this morning in all our sessions, particularly here in our education session. So I know it's early in the morning, but you can put down your coffee if you are a policy wonk at all. We have more than enough excitement for you. And if you're not a policy wonk, then you're going to need to get a triple shot in your espresso. In this session, I am going to provide a few introductory comments, and then we will have Mayor Anthony Villaraigosa come and give a featured presentation, and then we will follow up that with a panel discussion. So first, my introductory comments. There is good news in education in California, and the good news is that by many measures, California students are performing better and better each year. By state assessments, over 50% of all California K-12 students are proficient in math. That is an increase of about 20 percentage points from 8 years ago. The bad news is kind of the same story. Only about 50% of California students are proficient in math. English language arts scores are very similar. Moreover, there are wide differences in success rates across schools and across ethnic groups and different subgroups of California's student populations, so that the achievement gap remains large, the school readiness gap remains large. Again, there have been improvements across the board for all students, but we still have a long way to go. This problem of low proficiency is not just a California phenomena. This is true across the nation. And it has caught the attention of leaders both here in Sacramento and in Washington, who know that in an era of increasingly sophisticated jobs and global competition, there will be a high cost if this failure continues. The big question that we have before us today, and the topic of our discussion, is what do we do about it? The answers are not easy, and as many of you know, the education community is in the midst of a generational debate about the best course forward. One question is, how do we define success? How do we measure it? And who should be accountable for it? And how should they be accountable for it? What do students need to know to thrive in today's world? And how can those lessons be captured by tests or other evaluations? Measuring success also involves the collection of data to track progress and using that data to measure performance throughout the education system. Another question is, who is in charge? How do state authorities assure equity for all without handcuffing local officials with a one-size-fits-all policy? We've also seen an active federal government moving deliberately to shape policy in an area of national priority. Finally, you get what you pay for in education. Or do you? Education is expensive, and it's the single largest share of a California state budget that faces a staggering deficit. The questions about funding are not just about how much to spend, they're also about how the money should be spent and where it should come from. So you can see the debate underway in the education community is comprehensive and profound. PPIC has been working on many of these topics, and I encourage you to visit our website or talk to PPIC staff here today to learn more about our work. Education is one of the critical issues of our time, and we look forward to a preview of some of the perspectives and ideas that will shape the coming discussion. And now I'd like to call the mayor to the stage for his featured discussion. Mayor Anthony Villaraigosa needs no introduction. He is the 41st mayor of Los Angeles. He is a native Angelino, having gone to elementary school and high school in Los Angeles, and even graduating from a university in Los Angeles, from UCLA. He has served as a legislator here in Sacramento, of course, being the Speaker of the Assembly, elected to that post in 1998. And the mayor has a lifelong involvement with the labor movement and in education. Before serving in elected office, he was an organizer for UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Anthony Villaraigosa.
Mine. Yeah. You did. Perfect. Almost took my notes or my speech. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's truly an honor to address this esteemed audience of policymakers, and I'd like to thank the Public Policy Institute of California for organizing this conference and bringing us together, and particularly to thank and congratulate Mark Baldassare and the entire staff at the PPIC for the thoughtful and influential work they continue to produce every year. It is more than fitting that we begin the day on the topic of education reform, because there are few issues more pressing than ensuring all Californians have equal access to a world-class education. When most of us went to school in the 1950s and 60s, we were blessed that California public schools were synonymous with excellence. They were the gold standard, a national model that complemented our state's image as a land of opportunity. But somewhere along the way, the schools in which we invested so much time, thought, and capital slowly began to crumble, figuratively and literally. And we were left with what we have today. I heard the speaker before me speak about some of the progress that we've made. And while that is undeniably true, there is still so much work to do, and particularly, as he mentioned, with kids of color, with kids in urban school districts like Los Angeles, but schools throughout the state as well. We have schools that consistently rank in the bottom third among all states, schools that spend on average $2,400 less per pupil than most other states, schools that are in too many instances more segregated than they were in the 1950s, and schools that are viewed as so ineffective and irrelevant that 1 in every 4 students dropped out, believing their time would be better spent elsewhere. Now, when I say 1 out of 4, remember, in Los Angeles, it's closer to 1 out of 2. In schools like Locke and Roosevelt, one of my partnership schools, that dropout rate is closer to 65%. These are staggering numbers when you think about it. Education may be the most important issue of our time. It is certainly the most important economic issue. It is a civil rights issue, and it is the foundation for our common values that bind us as Americans. The belief in a democratic and free society, one where it doesn't matter where your zip code is, or your parents' tax bracket, or the color of your skin. Our public schools should be the embodiment of the American dream, a place where people are judged on achievement and rewarded on merit. But when you consider that California's so-called dropout factories are comprised of predominantly Latino and African American students, one has to ask whether we are actively creating a second class of citizens among a demographic that now represents the majority of our students. Even within our storied UC and Cal State systems, long heralded for their excellence and diversity, we've made few gains, and in some cases have lost ground over the past 25 years. In 1989, African American students represented over 5% of the student body at UC schools. Today, they're just 3%. And even though Latinos represent nearly 40% of the population of California and well over 50% of our public school population, they have just 20% of our UC students. This is the stark California reality. Now, sadly, I'm not telling any of you anything you don't already know to be true. The question isn't whether we've reached a crisis point or arrived at a critical crossroads. The question we must ask ourselves today is, what's stopping us from changing direction? Why are we for so long allowed denial and indifference to defeat action? Now, I do not raise this question lightly, and I do not come to my conclusions from a lack of experience. I was a legislative advocate for the California Teachers Association. I was a union organizer for the United Teachers of Los Angeles. From the time I entered the California State Assembly and became Speaker, I focused on education. I funded our schools. To my tenure as mayor of Los Angeles, I fought to fund and reform California's public schools over the last 5 years, while partnering with students, parents, and nonprofits, business groups, higher education and charter organizations, school district leadership, elected board members, and teachers. There has been one unwavering roadblock to reform: the UTLA union leadership. Well, not the biggest problem facing our schools. They have consistently been the most powerful defenders of the status quo. Now, I do not say this because of any union animus. Anybody who's known me over the years knows there's not an anti-union bone in my body. I am unabashedly a progressive. I believe in collective bargaining. I think in a democracy, the right to organize is a right that must and should be protected. But I can tell you that this union has stopped virtually every effort to partner with the Los Angeles School Board, to partner with the change agents in LA and really throughout the state. We created in Los Angeles the Public School Choice Program initiative that is now allowing nonprofits and charters, teacher groups, anyone with a proven track record of success to compete to run new or failing schools. All we said was, as we build new schools, and we're building new schools in Los Angeles, as we identify the schools that have been failing for 5 years and more, what we want is a metrics-driven standard by which we pick who's going to operate those schools. We can't continue to allow schools to be in a program improvement status indefinitely in the way that we have and just say it's okay. To compete, by 2012, over 50 low-performing schools will be under new leadership with a new chance for success. UTLA leadership fought against this reform. Now, partnering with the school board and the charter school community, we've doubled the number of charter schools in an effort to raise our test scores and alleviate overcrowding. Partnering with the Parent Revolution, we successfully passed legislation here in Sacramento, empowering communities to shut down, reopen, or take over a failing school if a simple majority of parents petition to do so. Working with LA Unified, I founded the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools to turn around 21 of the lowest performing schools. Now, these schools, so that you understand, in 2 years, with the same union contract, the same size schools, the same number of special ed kids, the same number of English language learners. These are these big schools. Roosevelt, almost 4,800, almost 5,000 students. We've outdone the school district and the state 2 years running on our API scores. We have engaged in 8 out of 10 schools. We've improved in math in 9 out of 10 schools. We improved in reading in the second year. It was 7 out of 10 schools and 8 out of 10 schools, respectively. We've increased the number of kids that are gifted because in our schools we test every child in the second grade. The school district has done that as well. We've developed a parent report card, which a school report card, which the school district has adopted citywide. And we've done a number of other things, including partnering with civil rights organizations and the ACLU. We filed a lawsuit to take a stand against the practice of seniority-based layoffs. And I'm talking about when seniority is used in an absolute sense. We in our schools, which were disproportionately affected by these seniority-based layoffs. In one school, we lost about 56% of our teachers. In another school, 52%. We, of course, went to the school district, and this was 2 years in a row. We, of course, went to the school district and the teachers union and said, you can't have a situation where you're laying off all of the teachers in one school and in the lowest performing schools. Work with us. Of course, the teachers union opposed, said there was nothing they could do, that was the contract and the education code, and so did the school district. But at every step of the way, when Los Angeles was coming together to effect real change in our public schools, UTLA was there to fight against the change and to slow the pace of reform. Now, let me pause to underscore the point once again. I come from an organizing background. I believe in the fundamental right of a worker to organize, to have a voice and a seat at the bargaining table. But union leaders need to take notice that it is their friends, the very people who've supported them and the people whom they have supported in the past, anyway, who are carrying the torch of education reform and are crying out for them to join. It is no longer acceptable for those who care about our children and our teachers to remain the loudest opponent and the largest obstacle to creating quality schools where teachers are supported, honored, and paid what they're worth, and where students are engaged and test scores are rising. So as California welcomes a new leadership team to the State House, I call on the teachers union to join the reform team once again, to join students and parents, business and nonprofit groups, charter organizations, higher education and school district leadership, to join us all at the reform table, ready with ideas, excited for change, and willing to say yes. Now, there's no better way to once again make our state the promoter of progressive change than by tackling two of the biggest problems facing our public schools: our unsound, unstable, and insufficient school finance system, and our lack of a meaningful evaluation system to ensure an effective teacher in every classroom. Now, it seems like every tired discussion on education reform starts with money. But when California has gone from a front runner in per pupil spending to 47th in the nation, when we spend less per pupil than each of the largest 10 states in this country, and when we spend nearly $6,000 less per student than New York, it's hard not to talk about money. And as I said over and over again, California taxpayers will never increase their investment in education until they're convinced that they'll see a return on their money. So while the funding we provide to our schools is not nearly enough to meet our educational goals, how we send that funding to our local districts is so complex and restrictive. It is creating gross inequalities in our classrooms. Put simply, the way California funds its schools is both inadequate and inequitable. The reason? Funds are not distributed by need, but instead by opaque and antiquated formulas that really don't tell us who's getting the money or how much they're getting. The result? It's impossible for us to track exactly why a school in Watts receives less money than a school in Brentwood. Schools in the most challenged neighborhoods with the greatest need is where we should be investing our education dollars. And we can change this. We can guarantee no school and no child is pitted against one another, and no school district receives less funding than it is receiving now. This change starts with making structural reforms to our school financing system by increasing transparency, flexibility, and equity. We can create a system where each local school district receives a base level of funding for every child, plus additional funding for students with special or high needs. Principals would be given more flexibility in how to spend these dollars, and to protect all students and local districts, we could set targets for base funding now. Phase in the new financing system over time. This way, no district would have to fear losing precious dollars. Now is the time to make this change. These lean budget years provide a critical window of opportunity to create a new framework for school financing. So when new money does become available, we have a system that's transparent, coherent, and responsive to student needs. But even when we're finally and fairly funding our schools, these reforms won't be complete unless we ensure a quality teacher in every classroom. Study after study has shown that the single most important factor to a child's academic success is a quality teacher. But we don't need studies to tell us this. Which one of us doesn't to this day hold a special teacher dear in our heart? Which one of us can't look back and remember that one teacher who turned it around for us? Many of you have heard me talk about Herman Katz. Herman Katz was that teacher for me at Roosevelt High School. When I dropped out and came back, he set the standard. He had high expectations. He insisted that I excel, and I did, thanks to him and my mom and as you heard in my bio, I went to college after that as well. Unfortunately, we do precious little to support and reward these great teachers, and conversely, even less to hold accountable the unsuccessful ones. Let me give you a snapshot of the current system. Nearly every new teacher, over 97%, is automatically tenured after 2 years. Now let me ask you this. If the tables were turned and they were giving out A's to nearly every student, wouldn't an A lose its meaning? Current tenure and evaluation practices aren't just meaningless for parents and districts, they are equally meaningless for the dedicated teachers seeking to grow and improve. My own school district in Los Angeles put together the Teacher Effectiveness Task Force, chaired by Dr. Mitchell, who's here somewhere. There he is. The findings told us that evaluations are one-dimensional and do very little to improve teacher quality or increase learning in the classroom. This evaluation system is serving no one. But California has the opportunity to adopt a new system, one that is meaningful, based on a clear definition of teacher and school leader effectiveness, and we must start by making data on student performance and student growth a key indicator. To be meaningful, evaluations must include multiple measurements: student growth over time, in-class observations, and reviews by students, parents, supervisors, and peers. Now, with a rigorous and relevant system, new and struggling teachers or administrators would be given the support and the training that they need to improve and succeed. And quality teachers and principals would be honored and rewarded. And once we have a meaningful system in place, we cannot continue to automatically guarantee lifetime employment to all teachers. Nor can we make decisions about assignments, transfers, and layoffs solely on the basis of seniority. One of the issues that we're going to have to grapple with, and I say this as a progressive, you could throw out seniority, tenure completely, or we can fix it. And I think it's really up to the teachers union because we cannot continue to operate in a system where 1 out of 2,500 teachers can be discharged. 1 out of 57 doctors' license can be removed. 1 out of 97 lawyers, but 1 out of 2,500 teachers. I mean, the idea, those of you who are in business, any of you, in fact, I worked for these unions, and I can tell you, they're able to fire people. I mean, the fact is, a progressive can come together, and we can say, look, this is broken. We've got to fix it. Let's fix it together. Let's reward teachers. Let's put a system together where we're paying our best teachers. Let's look at absolute seniority for assignments, transfers, and layoffs, all layered on one another, so that in the schools that are the least desirable, and I don't have to tell you, everybody, where they are. They're in the poorest areas of town. They're in the areas where, teaching me 40 some odd years ago and not teaching my son, 40 years after that, a much different proposition. Now, tenure and seniority must be reformed, or we will be left with one option: eliminating it entirely. When it comes to important decisions regarding where teachers are placed, we must factor in performance and create career ladders for our most successful teachers. When it comes to layoffs, we must ensure that they are not disproportionately affecting our most challenged schools. And when it comes to tenure, principals should have to proactively affirm that a new teacher is deserving. Tenure should be a meaningful accomplishment, not an arbitrary mile marker. To give districts and principals more time to make an informed decision about this permanency, we should increase the observation time to 4 years. 2 years is simply not enough for new teachers to meet performance standards. And finally, we must amend the education code to streamline the dismissal process. For example, those who are consistently unsuccessful in the classroom should be dismissed, period. This is not just in the best interest of our students, it is in the best interest of the excellent teachers who are dedicated to their profession. No more years of waiting for a case, month-long hearings, endless appeals. It's in nobody's interest to continue the dance of the lemons. It's about chopping down the trees that are growing bad lemons. It's about changing an entire system, a system that fails to fund our schools adequately, that doesn't recognize when students achieve, and doesn't value committed, quality teachers. It's time to start honoring excellence. It's time to recognize that we have reached that critical crossroad, and if anyone can turn indifference into action, it is the people of the Golden State. We must all join forces, ready with ideas, excited for change, and willing to say yes. I want to thank you for the opportunity to let me come before you today, and I want to say this. I will continue to reach out to that union leadership, but the time is here. And I can tell you this. There are people, when President Obama, when George Miller, when some of the most progressive Democrats in the country are starting to say to their friends, you're part of the problem. Let's work together. Let's build the change we want. Let's fund our schools, but let's hold every one of us accountable. Finally, I want to say that I believe that in our urban school districts across the country, the only one that can lead that effort is the city leader. It doesn't work any other way. It doesn't work when there are 7 people in charge. It just doesn't. It doesn't work when they can get intimidated by the array of forces against them when they run for re-election. It only works when there's one person working and collaborating with teachers and parents to make the change that we want and we need. Thank you so much.